With the best brand of football in Idaho, this is the 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
That's right. Welcome back. Another edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com. That's always redundant. You know, the announcer just said that, and then I always repeat it. But anyways, here we are. Brandon Baney.
Limits confusion.
That's right. Just in case you thought that was disinformation, it's not. This is the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast, where we break down 8-man football week in, week out. Brandon Baney with Will Hoenike. Will, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I think we've both recovered. We both were at multi-game events this past weekend broadcasting. I'm finally getting my voice back a little bit. How about you?
Mine really didn't go away too bad because I only did play-by-play once. Paul Kingsbury did the first game and the third game of the 8-Man Classic. I only did the middle game. And when you're the analyst, you can really cut things back a little bit if the vocal cords are feeling strained.
Well, and I know with Kingsbury, it's hard to get a word in edgewise, so
he carries it a bit. And I've been doing stuff with him for, going on 20 years now. And I remember where he was when he started versus where he is now. And dare I say he's good. He does a really nice job. And it's hard sometimes for new, inexperienced broadcasters to know that as soon as that tally light goes on that, you're by yourself for the next 2 hours, 2.5 hours, however long it's going to take. That's a big challenge for some people, but Paul can handle it now. He doesn't even need me there.
Well, yeah, we definitely need you there because you have that expertise and know the athletes and the coaches really well. So yeah, let's talk about it. You were broadcasting the Idaho 8-Man Classic, one of the great yearly events in the state of Idaho. It's a yearly tradition now at Middleton High. Only 3 games this year, and I would say the game that you were on the call for was probably the most, in terms of close competitive ball game. Where do you want to start? You want to start with that one with Clearwater Valley and Glens Ferry? I feel like the big story obviously is Oakley and Kendrick, these two titans in D1, D2, flexing their muscles a little bit. But let's start with Clearwater Valley getting a nice 20-12 win over Glens Ferry.
Yeah, and they did so, and I didn't know about this until afterwards. They did it without someone who they're expecting to be a very key contributor this year in Tiago Pickering. Didn't even play. I thought that they had a really nice balance between Anthony Carter and Bass Myers. Both of them had nice games, and then Louis Fabi had a nice game as well. And then defensively, I thought they did a really nice job. They'd maybe bend a little bit, but they wouldn't break. I was impressed. I was impressed with Clearwater Valley. I can see why a lot of people up north think that the Rams are, when it's all said and done, the Rams are probably going to be a playoff team. I would tend to agree based on what I saw.
Yeah, and of course Anthony Fabi led Clearwater Valley last year, and he graduated. And everyone's like, all right, good, no more Fabbies. And now there's another Fabi we got to deal with, but that's life in the 8-man game, right? 2
of them, Louis, and then there's also Jake on the defensive side of the ball, the linebacker, who had and he played a little bit of running back as well, but he had a nice game as well. It's a team between the Pickerings and the Schillings and the Fabbies. They've got a whole slew of all of them.
Yeah. So Clearwater Valley, a nice win, 1-0 start. What did you see from Glens Ferry? Last year Glens Ferry came to the 8-Man Classic, and we came away impressed. And then they got into their gauntlet of a conference, and we didn't hear much from them again. But what did you see from the Pilots?
I thought they competed really well. I think that they have a pretty good triumvirate on offense, where you have Landon Stewart at quarterback, and then you have Price Thomas and Landon Mills. Either in the backfield, they were, whether it's an offset eye or whether one of them split out as a receiver. I thought they have some nice pieces to work with, and I thought they competed really well. I think that it's, to your point, now not right now, but they're going to wind up going into conference play where they're going to have to play Oakley, Raft River, Cary, just kind of go down the list. Murtaugh looked really good this weekend against Wilder. It's going to be a tough run, but when you're talking about at-large bids, and these at-large bids are created by a mathematical formula and not just people who happen to glance at a scoreboard every now and then, I think there's definitely a chance that this Glens Ferry team, I would expect them to finish somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 when it's all said and done. But at the same time, I think that 500 out of that conference might be good enough to get you a playoff spot.
Yeah, I think they'll definitely be in the mix, and got to take care of business within the conference. That's, of course, the most important thing. So that was just one of the 3 games at the 8-Man Classic. Kendrick got the day started with a 36-0 shutout win over Notice. Well, we knew that if anyone, a D2 champs were going to be good. What did you see from Kendrick in terms of first game of the year with a lot of returning players?
Boy, the second quarter of that game, the final score, like you said, was 36-0. 28 of the 36 points for Kendrick came in that second quarter. And the first quarter was pretty good, for a typical first game. The two teams kind of, the body punches to kind of see what's there. And then Kendrick put its foot down in the second quarter and really took off. And, they not only scored, but they scored quickly. And then they got the ball back quickly. And the game went from, very tight and very competitive. It was 8-0. It went from very tight and very competitive to not very tight really quickly. And then in the second half, Paul and I talked about this a lot on the broadcast. If you're Notice, you want to stop the bleeding. You want to make the adjustments and make sure a game doesn't get completely away from you. I thought they did that very well. But on the other hand, Kendrick was able to just kind of ease out of there and not have, no injuries to speak of that I'm aware of. They were able to work some kids into the game and get some good playing time for some of their younger kids. So people might say, oh, well, they didn't score at all in the second half. Well, that can be looked at 2 ways. Number one, you've got to give Notice some credit. Notice is not a bad team. But also Kendrick was, they didn't need to go throttle down at that point. You know what I mean? They were able to play it a little bit safer with it being the first game of the year. And it was hot. And it was hot down on that turf. Notice they played with a couple of their key players limited, kids that were coming back from injuries. So, I don't want people to read too much into it for Notice saying, oh my God, they just got absolutely smacked around by a D2 team. Well, 2 things. Number one, Notice didn't have their full allotment at full go, which impacted the game a bit. I don't know that they win the game, but I don't think it's 36-0. Let's put it that way. And then on the other hand, it's Kendrick, I could sit here right now and pretty comfortably say, and I have said 1 week, that's all we have to go off of. But on 1 week, in my mind, there are 3 teams that have clearly kind of separated themselves from the pack. That's Oakley, that's Butte County, and that's Kendrick. And 2 of them are Division I teams. 2 of them play this week, as Oakley and Kendrick will play later this week. But those are all 3 really, really good programs. So I don't think that if you're Notice, I don't think you should be hanging your head that, you had a couple kids that weren't completely at full go and you got beat by Kendrick. I don't think you should feel that bad about it. I think they still did some good things with some of their younger players.
And Kendrick has a pretty deep bench for a D2 school. I would venture to say, without having looked at all the rosters, like I bet Kendrick's got more players than like Greenleaf Reds, for example, this year.
Oh, for sure. They were, I had it written down, and I don't have it in front of me now. Of the 6 teams that were there in terms of players, they weren't the smallest. They weren't the smallest roster. They had 24, 25 kids listed on their roster, whereas a couple of teams were down around 20. So, they've got the big story coming into this year with Kendrick was they only had 1 senior last year, and they won state, and it's a perfectly legitimate story. They've only got like 4 this year. They're still a young team, and so you get into a situation against a decent opponent with Notice where you can get some of those younger kids in and you can get them a couple series of playing time. You can get them some snaps. You can get the ball in their hands a couple of times. That's what perpetuates growth within a program. And Kendrick, this window's open for a couple of years for them. They weren't a one-hit wonder. There could be, a 3 or 4 hit wonder coming out of Kendrick.
Yeah, it's an exciting time up north for sure for Kendrick. Let's talk about the last game of the 8-man classic, Oakley and Prairie. And again, I don't know that, people look at it and go 56-0 and oh boy, Prairie must be, no, Prairie's good. But Oakley is just like next level good, right?
Oh, they were fantastic. And Bryce Severe didn't even play. You talk about it again, like, here they are, and Bryce Severe, who I think is when healthy, he's an all-state candidate, a potential player of the year candidate. He wasn't even in. I mean, he was there, but he wasn't in uniform. Porter Pickett, I thought they, for a kid that was an offensive lineman last year and a defensive lineman, living every lineman's dream, getting shifted to quarterback. I thought he was fantastic. 4 touchdown passes, touchdown run, managed the game really well. You can tell Prairie has, like, if Prairie's normally here, they have come down maybe a little bit, and a lot of it is experience related. They lost a lot of integral seniors off of last year's team. But Levi Hines, the sophomore quarterback, I think he's going to be a good one when it's all said and done. Trenton Lawrence, the running back, I think is going to be a good one when it's all said. I mean, he ran for 80 or 90 yards as is, so get him against a non-NFL caliber defense, and he probably is going to have some big games coming up in his future. So, but you're right. I mean, I think they were 5th in the coaches poll, I believe, and I didn't see anything out of Prairie that would dissuade me from thinking they're still one of the 5 or 6 best Division I teams in the state. I just think Oakley and Butte County are so clearly 1 and 2 that there might be that much of a gap between number 1 and number 5, which, especially in the Division I classification, hasn't been common in recent years. But this year, it seems like maybe it could be.
Yeah, there does seem to be more separation than usual this year. Let's talk about the third team of your big 3, Butte County. They had a non-conference game against Valley. Hey, Valley, welcome back to 1A D1 and 8-man football. Go play Butte County and Arco and see how that goes. At 62-12, they were up 62-0 at halftime. Will.
Yeah, and that's another one where Sam Thorngren, the head coach, he did what he executed his offense, and his team executed his offense and the defense in the first half, and then in the second half, you change things up and you give some kids some opportunity to play. Trayton Allen, a kid that I think has a chance if he gets enough carries to be a state player of the year candidate for Butte County, carried the ball 4 times. Your number 1 running back in the first game of the year carried the ball 4 times. Now he scored on 3 of them. It's a potent, powerful team. And Valley, head coach Ryan Jarvis was telling me over the summer, hey, we're going to be young. The results may not show this year. It might be a little bit of a rough year, but we're young and we do have some talent. So if we can just kind of stick with it, we'll be fine. And it's hard to stick with it against Butte County because Butte County is that good. But when they get more into, almost anybody on their. I don't see why when they're playing against a Glens Ferry or a Murtaugh or a Shoshone or whoever, I don't see why they shouldn't go in there thinking, hey, we got a shot to compete in this game. Time will tell if they do. But, boy, when you're opening volley, just like Prairie, you have a sophomore quarterback and a new coaching staff. Go play Oakley. That's tough, okay? You've got a very young, very inexperienced roster. Go on the road and play Butte County. That might be even tougher. Those were 2 really tough opening week assignments for Valley and Prairie.
Definitely. You mentioned Trayton Allen. He ran the ball 4 times. 3 of the 4 times he touched the ball, he was in the end zone. He had 170 yards on 4 carries.
Yeah. And then that's just when you execute your offense with Butte County. And one thing that Sam Thorngren has mentioned before is last year's team, they didn't really have that home run capability. They were going to be that team that took 8, 9, 10 plays to score. They didn't have a whole lot of that 50, 60, 70-yard burst. I I think they might have a little bit more of that this year. But then when you couple that going up against a younger, inexperienced defense that's going to get better, you take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves, I should say. But I think, Trayton Allen's a kid that if he's in a position where he can get 20, 25 carries a game, he's going to run for 2,000 yards. I just don't know that he's going to get enough carries to hit that benchmark.
Right. Mostly because of what you said. There'll be a lot of times where Butte County kind of just shuts it down and lets the other guys play. Let's keep kind of doing a whip around the D1 ranks. To me, I thought the most important and the most intriguing non-Idaho 8-Man Classic game was that big White Pine League battle up north, Lapwai and Kamei. And I guess we found out, we knew that Sage Lone Bear had transferred out of Lapwai to Clarkston, but Mason Brown also transferred out. So that was, two big guys that are missing for Lapwai. Oh, yeah. And Kamei comes through with a 34-28 win. It was a tight battle, a little low scoring for my tastes in the White Pine League. I'm used to seeing the two teams maybe in the 40s or 50s, but boy, what a great game to start. And if these two teams played later in the year, I don't know how it would go, but for a first game, it was Kamei getting the win.
Yeah, and from based on media reports, Kamei lost a player during the game who, a contributor on offense and defense who didn't play the entire game. So that likely impacts things a little bit. But, Lapwai, I mean, you take Mason Brown and you take Sage Lone Bear out, that changes the dynamic of that team. However, Terrell Ellenwood Jones is still there. Elias Yearout is still there. Promise Shaw is still there. They've still got some good players. So the fact that they went up there and they hung with a Kamei team that's pretty decent. They're not a bad team at all. And the fact that it was a good game, I think it points to what a lot of people have been saying over the last few weeks, is that they expect the White Pine this year to not really have that one juggernaut team, but rather 4 or 5 good teams. And I think that what we saw this past week, in particular in that game, I think it points to that. I think Genesee will be in that mix. I think Prairie will be in that mix of good teams that on any given, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whichever day, is capable of taking down the other.
Yeah, it was a really nice win for Kamei, and we talked about all the guys Lapwai lost. They did get a transfer from Kamei, strangely enough, Herschel Williamson, who was expected to play running back for Lapwai this year. So that was another interesting layer to the onion for week 1 up there. You mentioned some of those other White Pine League teams. Genesee beat Timberline in kind of a shootout. I was pretty impressed with the Spartans' efforts, actually, because Timberline, their margins are thin in terms of players, and so for them to only lose 52-44, I thought was pretty impressive.
Yeah, Timberline's got a couple pretty good bodies there. They have to rebuild the line a little bit. They graduated a couple of their key linemen, but skill-wise, they've got some players there that can make some plays. They just, they have the misfortune of being in Kendrick's league in that 1A Division II, which is going to present some challenges. And then Lewis County is also a solid team as well in that division as well. But Timberlines, they'll be okay. And Genesee, I think, is going to put up points on a lot of teams. I think Angus Jordan, the quarterback there, who can do it with his arm or his legs, and he's also a good, special teams contributor and does some things on defense as well. I think that he's a guy that's going to be in the mix for some all-state accolades when it's all said and done, which is kind of ironic that he would be selected to the All-Idaho team when he's technically from Colton, Washington, courtesy of that co-op between those two schools. But he's a really good player, and he's got some help around him. So I think Genesee is going to be a team that's able to put up some points, and that's what's going to make them tricky over the course of the fall.
Definitely. Troy has a new coach, Sean Buchanan. They beat Deary 42-20 in a D1 versus D2 matchup. Logos played a D2 school, not your typical D2 school, though. Pretty good council team. They lost 40-14. Logos has like like 40 kids out for football this year though. So like they're a wild card to me because they've got such strong numbers. They only have, I think it's one senior. So they're young, but man, strength in numbers for Logos as well.
And a pretty good quarterback in Jack Driscoll. So as those kids, rising seas lift all boats, right? So as the linemen get more experience, the quarterback and the running backs will be better. And as they get better, the receivers will be better. And as they get better, the defense will be better because they're having to practice against each other. So it's a program that's definitely moving the right direction, especially if they can keep those numbers in the 30 to 40 range where you're able to have some depth. You're able to play full JV games and a full JV schedule. Not every 8-man team has that luxury. And for Logos, if they're able to do that, which I don't know why they wouldn't be able to with those kind of numbers, the payoff, again, may not be visible in 2021. It may not be visible in 2022. Where you're going to start to see it is in 2024, 2025, when you get into, when you get a little further down the line into the development of the program.
Definitely. The White Pine is going to be buckle up. It's going to be must-watch football week in, week out up north. Other 1A D1 games of note, you said Murtaugh really stood out to you in a 66-0 win over Wilder.
Yeah, Junior Benitez is a guy who, he's just a dude. And I was talking to Joe Woodland, the Notice head coach. He came up and visited between games with Paul and I at the 8-man classic, and he goes, man, that kid can just flat out play. And, they're going to be one of those teams that's kind of hanging around that you got to pay attention to out of District 4. The thing to me that might be a little bit of a larger, and I don't know if concern is the right word, because again, it's week 1, is District 3, the Western Idaho Conference. Every one of those teams lost, and not only lost, but they lost convincingly. So though that's a conference as a group 1 through 5, that is going to have to regroup, and they're well coached. Woodland at Notice, Jason Rober at Idaho City, Kyle Dalsolio at Wilder, and then Coach Ward at Rimrock, Coach Perkins at Greenleaf Friends Academy. They're well coached teams, so I expect them to rebound. But I wasn't expecting them to go 0 for 5 as a conference, and not only go 0 for 5 as a conference, but across the board, they struggled. They really struggled.
Yeah, the highest point total of any team was Idaho City. They put up 18 points. Otherwise, you had a couple of shutouts. Rimrock scored 14. Greenleaf put up 6. You're right. In terms of the cumulative score, I didn't add all that up before the show, but I'm sure it's pretty astounding. So yeah.
Well, and I'm sure all those Western Idaho Conference fans that are tuned in would appreciate that, because while 18 was the highest number scored for, 36 was, I believe, the lowest scored against. So, go ahead and fill in the blanks. And like I say, I expect that conference as a whole to do much better going forward. And hopefully, here in a couple of weeks, we're looking back at it and we're just chalking it up to, it was just a bad week for the conference.
Definitely. The last 1A D1 game I wanted to touch on before we drop down to D2 was Cary making their 1A D1 debut. They traveled to Grace. A 7-0 game. I don't know if anybody saw this coming. The Grizzlies shut out the Panthers 7-0. It's not often you A, get a win over Cary, but B, shut out the Panthers in the process.
Well, and I got multiple texts from multiple coaches asking me, hey, is that score real? Is that score right? And in talking to a couple of coaches who were communicating with other coaches, the word starts kind of circulating around that Cary had trouble protecting the ball, and that's in 8-man football, ball security. That is huge. If you're going to fumble it, if you're going to throw interceptions, if you're going to have turnover problems, and they had 6-7 turnovers, you're going to keep almost anyone in the game, let alone a pretty good team, which I think Grace is a pretty good team. And we talked about, I believe on this podcast last week, we talked about how Grace defensively, they have the pieces to be a pretty good defense, and they just showed it, because turnovers aren't always giveaways. Sometimes they're straight up takeaways. And then the other one that people had some fun with was the number 7. You don't see too many odd numbers in 8-man football because that means you kicked a PAT. But that's a huge win for Grace. I mean, that's when you're talking about potential at-large bids when we get to mid and late October. Them beating Cary, that's going to be a big win for them if they're scrambling for an at-large bid.
Yeah, I think Grace is taking that next step, right? Last year they were competitive when they played D2 schools, struggled against the D1s. I think they've taken that next step forward. And for Cary, I think this is kind of the best thing that could have happened to them. It gives Coach Lane Kirkland a chance to gather his guys up and go, hey, we told you it was going to be more difficult jumping up to a level, and this proves it. We have to be better.
Yeah, and you don't see and I mean, I've been watching 8-man football in Idaho for 25 years now, almost 25 years. You don't see a Lane Kirkland coach team have games like this very often. So you can bet whoever they're playing this week, Butte County, boy, that nice soft follow-up for them. I will say one thing. I will be surprised if they turn the ball over maybe more than once or twice. That is something I guarantee you that veteran, experienced coaching staff in Cary, that's something they're going to be working on.
Definitely. And that'll be a game on IdahoSports.com. We will talk more about that in just a moment. But let's check in on Cary's old stomping grounds, the D2 ranks. A great week for Cary's old conference, the Sawtooth Conference. I think the biggest story has got to be Camas County just taking it to Rockland. Rockland came in as a team that had some buzz for, hey, this might be one of the small number of teams that could hang with Kendrick and knock off Kendrick. They lose to Camas County 54-26. And last year we had a lot of fun on our Magic Valley Prepcast, Scott Burton and I. We kind of dubbed it the year of the musher because Camas County had that late season run in football and they were very good in boys and girls basketball. Yep. And we had their athletic director, Mike McCann, on in the off season. And he said, hey, why can't it be the years of the musher? It could easily be the year of the musher again. And I think we saw it in week 1, 54-26 win over Rockland.
Yeah. And the thing that I was really impressed with when I went in and looked at it was, and then talking to a couple people, was the pass defense. They did a really nice job. I believe they intercepted either 4 or 5 passes. Cody Smith, the senior defensive back, had a couple of picks, and he was a guy that was asked to do a lot of the coverage of Teague Matthews, who is an elite 8-man level athlete. And Matthews had his, 4 or 5 receptions. So it wasn't like he was invisible, but it wasn't like they were all 70-yard bombs for touchdowns. They really made Rockland work. And I think there's a lot of credit to Camas County there. And I was really curious to see, because Camas County is, they've got decent numbers, but they don't have a bunch of 250-pound kids. You know what I mean? What they've got is they've got smaller, quicker, more athletic kids. And on that day, the athleticism of Camas County shone through. They won a lot of individual battles, and then defensively, they were really good against Rockland's pass. And Rockland likes to throw the ball. And then as a result, Camas County got a really, really nice win. And then now they've got to go play North Gem, who came off of a nice win themselves. They beat Malad's JV pretty convincingly themselves. So, a couple of good opportunities for Camas County to really shoot out of the gates and make sure that people are paying attention to them.
Definitely. 3 interceptions from that Mushers defense, including a pick 6 from Sage Patton, and Tristan Smith did his usual thing at quarterback for the Mushers. And he'll be, and remember the name Tristan Smith. I think he's really going to burst onto the scene this year for the Mushers.
Yeah, and he's just a junior.
Yeah.
They've got another year with him to go after this one. And his twin brother is also there. I mean, they've got a decent little stable of athletes. Like I said, they're not tremendously large, if you will. It's not like, you're going to Rocky Mountain and you're looking at a bunch of guys that weigh 275 pounds across the line, but they're good athletically, and they're pretty scrappy, and they have, last year was the year of the Mushers, so they've kind of figured out how to win. They're figuring it out. They're going to be a factor in that division for sure.
Definitely. The Smiths were key members of that basketball team that got all the way to the championship game and lost to Rockland. So personally, for a lot of those Camas County guys, beating Rockland, this was also payback for that state championship basketball game last winter, because, athletes on both sides, play multiple sports. So that was kind of cool for Camas as well. Dietrich. Dietrich. Yeah, Will, you told me the one thing you disagreed with my top 5 rankings for the media poll was you told me you got to get Dietrich in there somewhere. Yeah, heard and noticed, and holy smokes, 70-14, Dietrich defeats Rimrock.
Yeah, that's a good football team, and I think I said last week that I would put Dietrich and Castleford maybe a half step ahead away from Camas. I'll make the adjustment there, and that I think those 3 teams are all right about here, and it can just be an eye of the beholder. And I think that when those head-to-heads happened between Castleford and Dietrich and Camas County, those have the possibility of being just tremendous football games. Because I don't know that, and again, we're going off of 1 week, right? And we haven't seen film on all 3 teams. We haven't talked to all the coaches or anything yet, but they look like they're all pretty close, and that is meant as a good thing. I think it's going to be very competitive. There are going to be some great battles coming up in that conference.
Definitely. Castleford also got a nice win. They traveled to Mackay to play the co-op of Chalice and Mackay. So we talked about this, where Chalice and Mackay were seeking a co-op. They had to get the IHSAA to sign off on it. As far as I can tell, it was like Thursday, like late Thursday, they finally got the go ahead. They were already kind of planning to do it. I think it was just a rubber stamp type deal, but they were able to play. They're going to host some games at Mackay early in the season, and then later in the year when they get into conference play, since they are technically in Chalice's conference, they're going to play those games in Chalice, which is kind of cool. So Mackay got to host this first game with Castleford. The Wolves come over and win 48-0. This was a game I went back and actually watched the film of, because Castleford's one of those schools. It's kind of like Fort Knox, right? We don't ever get much info out of there, and they're always kind of a big mystery. And I was like, I need to pay better attention to Castleford this year. Jamie Ramos looked good at running back or quarterback. They had a number of different guys carry the ball. They basically started slow in the first quarter, found their footing in the second quarter, and from there kind of went on cruise control in a 48-0 win.
Yeah, and not uncommon this type of year. I mean, it was week 1 in the 8-man game. It was week 1 for everybody. So pretty much every team out there in a certain context was working out some kinks. And that's where, the performances of teams like Oakley and whatnot, that's what makes them all the more impressive. Is, boy, there were some teams that just looked really, really good.
Definitely. And Chalice Mackay, you might be wondering, well, what's their team called? They co-op in baseball, and they're the River Cats. But they're calling themselves Chalice Mackay 7C, because 7C is
the county.
Custer County, the county where these 2 communities reside. So I kind of like that. And, I also wanted to watch the film to see what do these uniforms look like? It really is kind of like Mackay wears theirs, Chalice wears theirs, kind of like in an all-star game or something. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Different styled uniforms, but it works. Everybody's got one number, so it ends up working out all right.
Yeah, you don't have 2 number 14s out there running around.
Right. So it was kind of cool. And I'm excited to see, how Chalice Mackay, bad news is, they're in the same league as Butte County and Grace, but opportunity there for them maybe to at least play the game of football, which I love to see.
Hey, go out and compete, and that's all most of these kids want to do. They just want a chance to go play, and bravo to the Idaho High School Activities Association for allowing this to happen. There are probably some old curmudgeons, some old stick in the muds that might have traditionally just said, no, too late. We're not doing this now. But, the 2 schools worked together, came up with a great plan, said, hey, we're just going to do it under your existing schedule. So there wasn't a whole lot of last minute flurrying that had to happen. You just had to have somebody to look at it and say, okay, I'd rather have these 15, 20 kids playing football than sitting on their couch. And they signed off on it, and away we go. And, Chalice Mackay now gets to play Rockland, so they get a deal with the stirred up Hornets nest after the Bulldogs lost last week.
Definitely. That'll be an interesting opportunity for both of these teams to get their first win of the year. Another team from the Sawtooth Conference that had a nice debut was Hagerman. This was a game, Will, you were planning on maybe trying to go scope out on Friday night. Hagerman playing Greenleaf Friends. But we discovered something interesting with their schedule along the way that we weren't aware of. Actually, you were the one who picked up on it because of Greenleaf Friends' co-op with Gem State Adventist Academy this year.
Yeah, what they do is the Adventist religion, their Sabbath runs from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, so they basically can't play on Friday nights. So whenever possible, they're going to play on Thursdays, and that was, we thought the game was going to be on Friday, and I live 15 minutes away from Greenleaf, and I thought, well, here's a chance to go see a couple of teams that I don't normally get to watch. Let's go check them out. And I drove up to the field and I kind of looked around and I'm like, all right, clearly the game isn't happening here. And then you found out that the game had actually happened on Thursday. But Hagerman, it was a nice win for Hagerman. They're one of those teams that's kind of been on that line between JV and varsity. They've got a new head coach in Bill Hicks, and Dana Strong, the outgoing coach, he had told me last year, it's going to take a couple of years to rebuild this as far as, really supporting those younger classes as they come through. But he's like, there's a few athletes here. He's like, make no mistake, there are some kids that can play some football. And Hagerman has a history. They were one of those teams back when the equivalent of Division I, if you will, in the 1A ranks was considered A4, but it was an 11-man team. Hagerman was one of the best teams in that conference. They've won state championships, so they have a history of some success down there along the river, and it was just a matter of trying to get that boat turned around and going the right way. And it seems like perhaps they've started to do that, and we'll see over the course of the year if they're able to build off of what was a good opening win last week.
Definitely. So nice job for Hagerman. Let's go to the Rocky Mountain Conference. We touched on Rockland and how they did. North Gem, you mentioned kind of unusual playing Malad's JV, and that's unusual because Malad plays 11-man football, and North Gem, of course, plays 8-man football. I think with their coach, Corey Hatch, they will line up and play anybody, anytime, anywhere, whether it's 8-man or I'm pretty sure they played 8-man for this game against Malad. But, even I was talking to him during the offseason about Clark County. And I said, is that going to be an 8-man game? Is it going to be, because I know Clark County's done the 6-man thing in Montana in the past. And he goes, I told them we'd play 6-man if they wanted to. I think he's just like, let's line up and play.
Let's just play.
Do yeah.
Some of those games in the past, like you remember Cary played Wood River a couple of years ago just to get a game because the county officials during the COVID pandemic basically were not letting outsiders into the county for athletic competitions. And what they did, and I've heard of this before, is when the 11-man team has the ball, they play 11-man football. When the 8-man team has the ball, they play 8-man. So I'd have to ask Coach Hatch for sure to see which way it was. But part of me wouldn't be all that surprised if Malad's offense played 11-man. So it was 11 on 11 when Malad had the ball, and then 8 on 8 when North Gem had the ball. But nonetheless, a nice win for North Gem because they're breaking in some new players. And we mentioned No Bridger Hatch, who essentially was the offense last year. I mean, everything ran through his hands. So they had to, they've got to break in some new players and some new roles. And so to go do it and to get a win to boot is a good deal for North Gem fans.
Definitely. No Bridger Hatch. They now have Rusty Hatch, 15 carries, 115 yards and a touchdown. No Brett Yost. They now have Mason Jenkins, 21 carries, 95 yards and a touchdown. Jack Perry, 5 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown. So that's got to be like 20 yards a carry. As a team, North Gem rushes for 331 yards. You know what the most not surprising but intriguing stat to me was?
I know what it is, but I'm going to let you say it.
North Gem, 0 passing yards on 0 pass attempts.
Yeah, and Coach Hatch is very blunt when he says, if we don't have to throw the ball, we're not going to throw the ball. What was the stat that he gave us? They've combined for like less than 70 passing attempts the last 2 years. So, the fact, let's put it this way. I think if you open up your, your Idaho State Journal down there in eastern Idaho, southeastern Idaho, and you open up your paper and you see North Gem quarterback throwing 15 or 20 passes a game, you're gonna wonder, okay, A, this is either a misprint, or B, Coach Hatch got hit on the head and isn't feeling right. One of the two.
Right. So North Gem continuing to do what they do, and they shut out the Malad JV 22-0. Water Springs found themselves in a shootout with Hanson. Hanson is always one of those teams that, because of the conference they play in, I feel like they get overshadowed a little bit, but Hanson's a good quality team, and Water Springs gets out of there with the 42-40 win.
Yeah, Drew Plocker had a huge game again. This is a kid who was dynamic last year. He's, dynamic version 2.0 this year. Comes out of the gates and runs for 300 yards in the first game. And, oh, by the way, throws for 150. And, oh, by the way, has 14 tackles. And when I was asking some questions of the Water Springs folks, because they're great about submitting information to us, so we have good information on them. And when I was asking them, I'm like, hey, what did you think of Hanson? Because sometimes we don't hear as much about the Huskies. And to a man, everyone that I heard back from, that team can play. They don't have a ton of depth. They don't have a ton of numbers. So injuries could be an issue for them down the road. But Hanson definitely has some kids that are going to make some plays and give them a chance to be competitive.
Hanson now will play Murtaugh in the annual Wagon Wheel rivalry game, the battle for the Wagon Wheel this Friday. So Hanson a chance to get that first win of the year. District 3, Horseshoe Bend and Council to me are kind of the co-favorites going into this thing. Horseshoe Bend actually plays a conference game right out of the gates against Cascade. 66-14 win over the Ramblers, who are playing varsity football for the first time in a couple of years. And then Council goes up to Logos. We kind of talked about it, just smacked around a D1 team by a final of 40-8. So
yeah, Council's a good squad. I mean, Horseshoe Bend's a good squad. They're both good squads. And then you throw in, Tri-Valley goes to Idaho City and thumps them. I don't know that I would say that I'm shocked that Tri-Valley won. I'm a little bit shocked that they went there and won by 30. But I said last week, that's a team I've got my eye on. I think that next year is the year for the Titans, really. But this is a year where they can make a lot of teams uncomfortable and they can make a little bit of noise. And then Garden Valley, who plays their first game this week, that's another team. I mean, I think there are 4 pretty compelling teams in that division, and it's going to be interesting over the course of the next 8 weeks to see how it plays out. And then, you got Cascade and Meadows Valley and Salmon River, who, hey man, they're all grinding too, and they're all going to say, hey, don't forget about us. And I'm not forgetting about you. I'm not forgetting about you at all. I think you got a little bit of work to do to make up that gap. And in time it'll come. I think it'll come, but I was glad to see Cascade on the field competing. I'll be glad to see Meadows Valley on the field competing. They're a little thin in numbers again this year as they try and build things up there in New Meadows. But that's I mean, just in terms of school districts, that's just one of the smaller school districts in the state of Idaho. So they don't have a ton of boys to pull from. But they'll host Greenleaf this week, and I think what should be a pretty interesting matchup. And really interested to see which squad gets the win in that game.
Yeah, well, both teams really, really young as well. A lot of freshmen and sophomores for both of those teams. The only team from the league besides Cascade who lost the league game to lose was Salmon River. They lost to Lewis County 58-14. Tri-Valley now plays Lewis County. That could be a game with playoff implications potentially.
It could. It's a good matchup. I mean, I've been a big fan of Coach Monty Madrell and the Lewis County Eagles and what they've been doing for a few years now, and they seem like a team that, again, they're going to be overshadowed because they're sharing a stage, if you will, with Kendrick, who I think is legitimately one of the 3 best 8-man teams in Idaho, regardless of classification. And Lewis County's not quite there yet, but I do think they have a chance to win, 5, maybe 6 ball games, get into the playoffs, win a couple of games, make some noise. And then, the thing is a statement I heard once that I always thought was very true is, I'd rather be the ugliest kid invited to the dance than the prettiest one left at home. And once you get into the playoffs, just get there and then let the chips fall where they may. Maybe it doesn't go well. Maybe it does, but you got to be there in order for that to happen. And I think both Lewis County and Tri-Valley, they both have a chance to be one of those teams that comes in that maybe not a lot of people are expecting a lot out of immediately. Maybe they get a favorable matchup. Maybe they get a favorable side of the whole bracket. And then, you get a couple weeks into November and you look up and you're like, hey, who are these Eagles? Who are these Titans? What are they doing? Who are they? And I think either one of those teams has a chance to do that.
Yeah, that'll be a fun matchup for sure. And then let's go all the way up to the North Star League up in District 1, this new 5-team league in the D2 ranks. They're playing conference games. Pretty much they've said they're going to play 7 conference games, so they'll play some opponents twice, and then you get one game to do what you will with. Mullen St. Regis played Superior, Montana. We talked about last week. They always go play a game in St. Regis. They lose that game to the defending 8-man champs in Montana, 50-32. But to me, the more intriguing matchups were the 2 conference games. You had Clark Fork shutting out Lakeside 46-0. And then you had Wallace getting a pretty big win over Kootenai 60-12.
Yeah, and both those teams that came up on the short end of the stick are teams that are growing towards the future. Lakeside playing without their marquee athlete Vander Brown. He's chosen not to play football this year. That hurts them. Kootenai is they're young. They're young and they don't have a ton of numbers. Coach Pfeiffer in Kootenai said they've got a couple of bigger classes coming, and he said he loves the group that he has this year, but he said we can't have a whole lot of pulled hamstrings or twisted ankles or we're going to be in trouble. So I love seeing them out on the field. I love seeing them out there competing. I think Wallace has a chance to be a little bit of a spoiler in that league, but I think the 2 teams to beat is the team, since there's going to be a District 1A and a District 1B come the 1A Division II playoffs. I think that's Mullen St. Regis, and I think that's Clark Fork. And coincidentally, those 2 teams are playing this week. I think those are 2 solid football teams. They're 2 well-coached football teams. And they're going to have a couple entertaining football games against one another this year.
Yeah, that is a 3:30 kickoff in Mullen Friday afternoon, I guess, 3:30 kickoff. That'll be an intriguing one. Let's take a look at what's on the schedule for this week. We'll start with the D2s and kind of work our way up, keeping in mind that there are some D2, D1 crossover games. So we talked about Clark Fork at Mullen. We talked about Meadows Valley hosting Greenleaf Friends. First game of the year for the Mountaineers. Garden Valley will be making their season debut. They will be at Rimrock. You've got Cascade at Salmon River. Two younger teams that are trying to build. Somebody's going to get a big win for their program. That'll be interesting for sure. Shoshone will be making their season debut. They're going to play the Raft River JV, actually. That should be a pretty good test for them. You've got Merton Hansen in the wagon wheel game, like I said. Water Springs at Hagerman, a pair of 1-0 teams, could be pretty interesting. You've got Dietrich playing Glens Ferry. Dietrich, of course, coming off the 70-point win in week 1. This one's intriguing to me, Will. Notice at Council. How do you think that one goes?
Very much, because I mean, as we've talked about earlier just on this podcast, we both think Council is legit. We both think Council is a good team that has a chance to make some noise in the 1A Division II classification. And notice, it's interesting to see what they do if those players who were a little bit limited last week, if they're a little closer to a full go this week. So if Notice's offense is able to be a little bit more productive, if they're able to hit on a couple of bigger plays, and I think that game is going to tell us a lot about both those teams. It's a non-conference game, so it's not like you're going to be thinking, oh my gosh, Notice is sunk or Council is sunk. But I think that both those teams, Council, I think, did themselves a service by going and beating Logos last week. And if they can beat Notice this week at home up there in Adams County, they're going to have a lot of people that are going to start taking some notice of them. Casual fans are going to see that they're 2-0 and they've beaten two, pretty competent 1A Division I opponents.
Yeah, that's a big game for both sides in terms of getting some momentum going. Clark County's going to make their long-awaited debut. They're going to travel to Castleford to play the Wolves JV team. To me, the best matchup of 1A D2 versus 1A D2 schools in terms of storyline is Camas County at North Gem. Camas County going back to the scene of the crime where they knocked out the undefeated Cowboys in the opening round of the playoffs last year. One of the more shocking upsets I've seen in some time in Idaho. How do you think this rematch goes?
Well, I think that it's going to play out much the same as last week, where people were wondering if Camas County's defense would hold up against the Rockland passing attack. I think now the question is Camas County's defense going to hold up against the North Gem rushing attack? And that was the story last year too. And what we didn't anticipate last year was that Camas County's offense was going to be as efficient and as effective as they were counterpunching. I think what we saw last week is that this Camas County offense is going to be able to score some points. We saw that. So the question becomes, is North Gem, are they going to be able to counterpunch on offense? And is their ground attack going to be potent enough to limit Camas County's chance at big plays on offense? And if that game is able to be played a little bit shorter, if you will, and that means North Gem controls the ball a little bit more, and they've got, two kids at 20 plus carries. If they shorten that game a little bit, I think that's going to be big advantage for Camas County, or I beg your pardon, big advantage for North Gem. Whereas if Camas County is basically able to win at the line of scrimmage and shorten some of those North Gem drives and get the ball back, it has the potential to be a game where Camas County, we're looking at it on Friday night going, hey, Camas County just dropped another 50 burger on somebody from, District 5-6 over there on the other side of the state. It could go either way. It's just a matter of which front is able to win. If North Gem pushes Camas County, North Gem's going to win. If Camas County pushes North Gem's, Camas County is probably going to win.
Yeah, it's going to be a fantastic battle for sure. The D1 schedule, White Pine League play officially opens. You've got Troy at Prairie. That's going to be a great one. Potlatch making their season debut at Genesee. You've got Logos at Clearwater Valley as well. Kamei's got a really interesting non-conference game. They'll host Raft River in the season debut for the Trojans. That's going to be a great one.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see that one because, Raft River, they lost some ponies, but they've got some ponies back too. So, the cupboard is not bare for Coach Evans down there in Raft River. And, we know Kamei's, they've had a week to knock some of the rust off, but they've got some kids that can play. So that should be a really, really interesting matchup where, again, you talk about wins that can really help a team come, potentially at large bid time. Whichever team comes out on top in that one is going to be able to point at that game and say, hey, but we beat, Team X that went on to win 6 games. Kamei can say they beat Raft River that went down in what I think is the best division in the state. And, I think Raft River is going to win at least 5 or 6 games. If Kamei can say they won that game, that's going to be a big feather in their cap. Flip side of the coin, if Raft River is able to get the job done against Kamei, that's a good non-conference test for them.
This could have Max Prep's rankings implications down the line as well. This is a big matchup for sure. We talked about Grace. They got the big 7-0 win over Cary. They're going to play Lighthouse Christian. It'll be the debut for the Lions and new head coach and new athletic director, Jason Smith. He's had a busy off season. It'll be interesting to see how the Lions do on their beautiful turf. You've got, and then you've got the 2 big matchups that are going to be broadcast live on IdahoSports.com. We talked about already, Butte County is going to travel to Cary. We'll have that game for you live on Friday night at 7:00. And then, of course, the game in Cambridge. This is a neutral site game. You've got Oakley and Kendrick meeting up in Cambridge, home of the Tri-Valley Titans. How do you think this game goes between Oakley and Kendrick?
Those two teams played in Parma last year, and I was at that game. And for most of the first half, it was pretty close. I want to say it was something like 16-0 at halftime in favor of Oakley. And then in the second half, Oakley just ran away with it and wound up winning by 40-plus points. That's exactly what Kendrick coach Zane Hobart wanted to see from his team. Not that they lost. He didn't want to see them lose. He wanted to see how his team would match up against a stronger, more physical team. And for a half, they did pretty good, and they were able to learn from it and go on and ultimately win the state championship. I think this is a great matchup for Kendrick. I think that one of the things we saw against Notice was when Notice kind of squared up the pads and said, okay, let's just knock some heads and see what happens. Kendrick answered the bell. They answered the bell and limited Notice's offense big time. I think that is something that speaks well to the Tigers' ability to kind of stand up face to face with Oakley. Kendrick has some big linemen. Jack Silflo's a big kid. Dallas Morgan's a big kid. They've got some big kids. It's not going to be a size issue. It's going to be a toughness issue, a desire issue, a grind issue. I still find myself thinking that I think Oakley's going to win that game. I don't think whatever it was last year, 42-0, 46-0, whatever it was, I don't think it'll be anything like that. I can see this being like, a 32-26 type game that is just a lot of fun it's a lot of fun just to watch.
Definitely. That'll kick off Friday night, 6:00 on IdahoSports.com, so everyone can get home at a decent hour. So, yeah, be sure to catch that live on IdahoSports.com as well. All right, before we get out of here, I do vote in the media poll every week for the football poll, the weekly poll.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it. I've been waiting all week for this.
My 1A D1 poll, the top four stayed the same. I still got Oakley 1, Butte County 2. I've still got Prairie 3, despite the loss. Whereas if you take a big lopsided loss to a really good team, I'm not going to ding you, at least for the first game. And then I've got Raft River 4 still yet to make their debut. I did swap out the 5 spot. I had Carey as my number 5. I put Kamei in as my number 5 team now after a pretty impressive win over Lapway.
Not bad. Not bad. I mean, I'm going to stand by what I said earlier where I think 1 and 2 are pretty clear. And then I think 3 through about 8, maybe 9, they're going to sort themselves out over the course of the season. Kamei, I think, is worthy. Clearwater Valley, I think, is worthy. I think Notice will be worthy in time. They weren't last week, but I think they will be over the course of the season. And then the teams you have in there, I think Prairie is still going to be in the mix. I think Genesee will be in the mix. Raft River will be in the mix. Murtaugh, I think, will at some point be in the mix. I think there are a lot of teams, a lot of ways you can go with spots 3, 4, and 5.
Definitely. 1A D2 poll for me. Top 2 were the same. Kendrick 1, Castleford 2. I had Rockland 3. I dropped them out because they lost by such a lopsided margin. And I actually had Camas County unranked, and I put them in Rockland's spot. So I've got the Mushers at number 3 right now. That was a very impressive win to me. I've got Council at number 4 still. They didn't move. And then I had Mullins St. Regis in there with the loss and with Dietrich's. That was an oversight on my part. My bad. Dietrich is now in my top 5 at number 5 with the chance to move up.
So 2, 3, and 5 all from the same division, huh?
Yep.
Okay. It's hard to argue with some of those. I think we can split hairs on some of those teams, but I think that 1 and 2, until somebody beats them, I think that's fine, but I'm a little more bullish on Dietrich than some people. Some people are a little more bullish on Camas County. Some people would say, what about Horseshoe Bend? Mullins St. Regis, so what? They lost 1 game to, Montana's state champ. There again, we can split a lot of hairs, but I think that your top 2 in both are both pretty solid and I would argue not really debatable at this point.
Definitely. All right. Well, we went a little longer than I was anticipating today, Will. I'm very sorry that I took so much of your time away, but we get talking about 8-man football, and I lose track of the time, but
hey, there are worse things. We could be talking about dental work or something like that. So I'm good with this.
Yeah, stay tuned for the dental work Prepcast coming your way soon. Enjoy all of the games this weekend, everybody. We'll be back to break it all down again on another edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast next week. For Will Hoenike, I'm Brandon Baney. Thanks for tuning in on IdahoSports.com.